Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming back. We are going to go ahead and get started. If you missed my note in the chat, if you'd please sign in with your name and district, and that will serve as our record of who is here today. And I'm going to put the link to today's slides one more time in the chat. And we're going to go ahead and get started. Let me share my screen. I have a lot to share with you today. Let's see here. Yep. All right. So this is part 2 of our Summer Academy. And today we're going to talk a little bit about ways to support our students in the classroom and in our ELD classes. Some scaffolds and things like that that you can use. So let me advance my slide. As I shared yesterday, we come from our blueprint for ELD success on the DESE webpage. And today we're going to kind of touch on all of them. So let's get going. So one thing we're going to talk about is the fact that all students deserve equal access to content. And that's one of our main goals, providing that equal access. An outcome is that we're going to understand and be able to use some of the research-based tools that give our students that access to content. And again, there's that link to our presentation. So I'm going to start with some general assumptions that we all want some practical strategies that we can use in our classrooms. We don't have time to waste. We're all busy people. And I'm assuming that all of us involved here know a little bit about language acquisition. And also if the premise that if we live something, we're going to use it. So I found with students and in my own personal life, if I do something, if I have that hands-on, if I use it, then I understand it much better. So we're going to start talking about the use of instructional time. That's one of the most important factors in the classroom when working with English learners. It's one of the basic elements, of course, for ELs as well as any other subgroup of students. And I'm sure if you've worked with English learners before, you know that they have that double load. They're having to learn content as well as learning the language. So we have to find a way to make that easier for them. And a lot of teachers feel pressed for time. And so we realize we don't have time to waste. They've got to get up and at rapid speed. So that's what we're going to look at. So 3 things to keep in mind. We need to keep our students engaged. We're going to use that time in the classroom, using every minute as wisely as possible. Have a specific task in mind. Be prepared for class. Come with a plan in place. There are times, I'll admit it, there are times when I started teaching a class and I have this great plan laid out, but then students have other needs that they voice during the session. And when they voice those, we have to be able to kind of pivot, that key word from the last couple of years, and have some things in our tool belt to be able to meet the needs as they arise. So be prepared for those as well. And then appropriate timing, pacing the lesson so that we make sure we're supporting the students and that we give them time to ask questions or to do some formative assessments and see if we need to change our course as we go along. So those are 3 things to keep in mind as far as timing goes. For those who have just joined us, if you would please put your name and district in the chat as our record of who is here today. Thank you. All right, here is a summary of some of the most effective teaching practices, and some of them hit on what I've already said: having clear goals and a learning objective, meaningful and challenging and motivating context, curriculum that's rich with content, well-designed, structured instructional pace, um, active engagement and participation. Active engagement is one of those key things. The opportunity to practice, apply, and then transfer the learning is also something that's very key. Providing key feedback that is on those correct and incorrect responses so that students know when they're doing well, and they know if they've made a mistake, they can come to you and they're comfortable with you addressing those. And then periodic review and practice of what we've already learned. Frequent assessments, both formal and informal. Opportunity to interact with other students in motivating and appropriate structured contexts. So getting the students speaking is one of the things we don't always spend enough time on. And this comes from Unlocking the Research on English Learners, What We Know and Don't Yet Know About Effective Instruction. Very good article if you have a chance to read it. All right. One other thing we cannot forget is that the time it takes for English learners to develop proficiency. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not probably going to happen in the first year. It takes time. So that's another one of those time considerations we have to keep in mind. And then there's this example here from California where they studied student over a span, I think it was like 10 years. And they concluded that it took students from 3 to 5 years to get develop oral proficiency, and 4 to 7 years to develop that academic proficiency where they can understand the sophisticated language of the classroom. So the key point here is don't exit your students from the program too soon. Keep them in there until they're able to work at the level of all the other students in the classroom. All right, the second thing to consider is that scaffolding teaching and the specific language development that I said we're going to address today. So first thing we're going to look at is the word scaffold. I don't know if you're familiar with a FAIR model. This is something I used a lot in my classroom, and I have something here to share with you. This is how we did it in my classroom. You just take a sheet of paper, fold it in half, crease it, fold it in half again, crease it, and then from the folded corner, these are the open edges from this folded corner, fold it in half, fold it about halfway, and then I like to fold it again a little bit further, and then when you open it up, you have your FAIR model, and you can't see very well on this, but you can label. If you fold it twice, it gives you a little area here that you can label the parts. So I've got the definition, the characteristics, the examples, and the non-examples there. There we go. You can see where it's in the middle. And then you put the word in the middle. So this was a real easy way that we didn't have to print something out ahead of time, but my students always could make their own FAIR models really quickly that way. And I've included at the bottom of this screen some really good examples of activities that you can do with the FAIR model. But one thing that most people don't use this properly is they start with the definition, and that's actually the last thing that you should use in a FAIR model. You should start with the characteristics. So if you're looking at something and you're going to start up using the scaffold with them, have them tell you what the characteristics of the thing they're describing it is. And then I usually jump to the examples. So show me a picture or tell me something about it, and then go to non-examples. And after they have those 3 things, then they're able to write their definition. So we're going to try this together here. Who can tell me some characteristics of a scaffold? What is a scaffold? I'll go ahead and unmute if you want to tell me what characteristics you know about a scaffold.
I would say it's a way to support. It's something that you can implement as a support to get to make the content more comprehensible so the student can reach a goal.
Okay, so we could, as a characteristic, we could put supports.
Yeah.
I would say goal. maybe. All right. What would be an example of a scaffold? You can see I've given a picture clue here. So I could move that picture into my examples as a scaffold. Other scaffolds that you could think of that would be examples.
I think using gestures for oral language would be an example.
Very good, yes. Or pictures, or sentence frames, all of those things. And then our non-examples, if we didn't use any visuals, if we didn't wait for answers, if we had no collaboration or no modeling, those would be the non-examples. So then after we have all of those things, we could come up with our definition of what a scaffold is. It's providing supports, just as Tracy said, providing those supports and things that enable students to learn. So here's an example again of the FAIR model. As I said, most people usually start with the definition, but it's actually the best if you do that at last, because then the students can summarize what they've learned. Start with your characteristics, and then go to your examples, and then find your non-examples. So what type of scaffold is this? WIDA gives us this listing of the different types of supports that we can give our students. We have sensory supports, graphic supports, and interactive supports. So if we were using a FAIR model, what type of scaffold would you consider that to be? Sensory, graphic, or interactive?
Graphic.
Would be graphic.
And interact. It's also interactive.
Yes, I was going to say, and it could also be interactive. Have you used this support in your classrooms? And how could you use it if you haven't? Or how could you modify it in the classroom? Have any of you used the FAIR model in your classrooms before? Or in your coursework? And if so, can you tell us if it worked for you and why do you think it works? It's my teacher wait time.
I used it a bit in my classroom. I actually was I was a special needs teacher first.
Yeah.
And so it really helped pull different things so they could see it different ways.
Right.
I think the only thing we had trouble with was when the word had multiple meanings. So we had to kind of do it for both meanings for them to see that.
Very good. And that's a great point too. That brings out more aspects of the language that we might not have considered when we first introduced the words. So very good. So that was one of those ways you had to modify it when you looked at. Going back to this page, Scaffolding for English Language Learners from Support Ed. That's a very good article that kind of talks to some of those things and how you can use it and how it can be adapted to your classroom. So just draw your attention to that. And there's that list again of those WIDA supports. Another thing that we can work on when working with our English learners are those graphic organizers. And this one is dealing specifically with vocabulary. So what do you notice about these three posters that would make them more usable in the classroom? What's something you notice?
I noticed on your opinion slide, you have the English and then you also have the Spanish translation.
Yes, very good. So we've given them both languages if necessary. How about the word persuade? What do you notice on this graphic? What is the focus of that graphic, do you think? this right here will give you the clue.
Possibly prefixes and suffixes.
Yes, we're breaking the word apart to give them a better understanding of how some prefixes and some root words give us meaning to the words. So we have persuade, but we could also use it in persuasive or persuadable or persuasively. And if we know those word parts, then we can build on that base word that we teach the student. And then with this one up here, we've broken it apart by the parts of speech and definition, kind of like the Frere almost. We give a synonym and an antonym. So we have the word, the part of speech, the definition, and the synonyms and antonyms. So they're all good ways to help approach understanding of words with students. And the link at the bottom here just gives you these posters. And I think there are a couple of additional ones if you wanted to go back to those. Oh, we already did that. So this again, if we asked what kind of scaffold this one would be, it would be, of course, a visual. And I hope that all of you are using posters in your classrooms because our students need those visuals. And even after you take them down, sometimes the students will look at the wall where they were because it brings it back to their mind and they've solidified that information within their mind so that they can refer back to it. It helps them to remember. I've included here several different vocabulary resources that I've used through the years that I find very effective. Read and Write for Google was recently purchased by another company, and all of the pro tools that you can use in Read and Write for Google are free to teachers through, I think, the link that I've provided for you here. The student version, you can use a limited part of the tools without having to pay. But the teacher's version is really nice because you can gather words and make word lists, and it gives you picture dictionaries and everything. So that was one of our favorites in the classroom. Then I've given you some vocabulary. This ESL writing vocabulary notebook is very good. There's a UL toolbox for the Frere model. And then a template. And then this was really fun. We did this with my class too, Frere a friend. And so it gives you an activity that you can take it one step further and incorporate some speaking and some interaction, collaboration with that. Go to the next one. So one thing about doing this, some people feel like they have to put everything in every lesson, and that's not the case. And when you're working with the students, it's best to focus on just one component of the academic language at a time. And this again comes from our WIDA standards, our new updated standards, looking at the discourse, the sentence, and the word phrase level and the criteria. So pick one of those in each lesson or two at the most and focus in on those rather than trying to cover everything in every lesson. So another way we can do this is through anticipation guides. This was another thing that was a favorite of my students from kindergarten all the way to high school. And so watching videos is another one of those scaffolds that we can use if it's used appropriately. So one thing that helped my students a lot was having this anticipation guide that we looked at before we watched the video, and they made a true or false statement, whether they thought that was true or false. Then we watched, and as they watched, they would fill in what they found while they were watching. So this one was an example for older students, and a lot of times I would get lessons that the teacher was going to go over in the classroom and find a video that was fairly easy to follow, and we would watch it together and go through the list as we were watching. And then we also did this with, oops, I don't want it to play. With my younger students. This one I wanted to share with you this example from Edpuzzle. If you've never used Edpuzzle together or before, it's a really good tool. And this one we said, I think this is true or false. And then afterwards we said, now I know that this was true or false, and they could do this as they were watching. But what I've done here with this Ed puzzle, I'm going to click on it, see here, make sure that I've, let's see if it lets me. You have to have a Google account or set up an account to use it. But all right, so this is a very short video about robots. And you'll see at the bottom, there are little spots. That's where I've put a question. The nice thing about this is it keeps all of this information and it does the data gathering for you as the students are answering questions, and gives you a teacher report at the end. But if I push play, it's going to tell us a little bit here.
Hey everyone, it's Kai again. I'm back with another amazing episode of Nat Geo Kids. And this week we're talking all about robots. Okay, so I bet you're wondering, what exactly is a robot? Good question. Basically, a robot is a machine created to perform a series of actions. These actions could be as simple as roaming around the house, vacuuming up dirty floors, while...
Okay, so then at certain points, it's going to stop and give a question. And the question here is, robots help people. And that I've already done this. So it's giving me my answers, but the answer I picked was true. So you click your correct answer. It's going to tell you if you were right or wrong. And then you click continue.
While other robots perform more complicated tasks, such as traveling to and exploring different planets, like NASA's Mars exploration rovers, which were built to study the surface of Mars.
And again, it says robots have only been on Earth. I'm going to pick false. And then it tells me if I got it right.
And
did
you know that
until you get through the end of the video. The nice thing about this is when I was setting up my anticipation guide, I used those questions as stopping points within the video. So the first one says robots help people. I already answered that. So now I can say, yes, that's true. And then we can have discussion afterwards. So Ed Puzzle was one of my students' favorite things. Not only does it let you put multiple choice questions, you can put short answer questions, you can put recordings of yourself explaining things, you can type in short explanations or definitions as you go along, and anything that helps your students understand the video as they're watching. So I just wanted to share that tool with you as a good example of things or scaffolds that you can provide for your students when you're dealing with a new concept or something that they're having to learn in the classroom that you can find a video that goes along with. It's a great big world. All right, so this type of scaffold would be, again, a graphic. So it's giving us a video. It could be an interactive support. And it's also somewhat sensory because you're watching the video. So we have that graphic of the anticipation guide. We have the video that's giving us that input visually and auditorily. And then it could be interactive if you're doing it with a partner or if you're discussing it later. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the 4 domains. And the first one asks, why is listening important? Well, it's fundamentally and unquestionably grounded in oral communication. It's something we need. It's critical to being able to work in the 21st century and have a job. You have to be able to listen to what others are saying and process that and act upon it. So those are skills we have to develop. If your student is having trouble understanding conversations in English, you can use audiobooks as an independent activity. You can add voice recordings to any of your Google Slides or other activities. Using music, I had one student that came to the United States from a very remote village in Mexico. She didn't even speak Spanish very well. She spoke an indigenous language, and she would come into my classroom, even though she spoke very, very little English. She would come into my classroom every day singing Adele's song, Hello. she'd picked up that word hello and it stuck with her. So I took that a little bit further and I found a website that takes songs and gives the lyrics, and it will also give you the translation of someone singing it in another language. And so I used music to enhance her English, and she picked up language very, very quickly that way through music. It was a passion of hers. And then she was such a wonderful singer that I got her involved with choir, and she ended up in the show choir and one of their top performers. So just that, finding out what she enjoyed and playing on it really brought her language along very quickly, and she picked up English really fast after that. And that also includes using total physical response, because they're immersed in it and they're involved in it. And adding those pictures, as we talked about a moment ago, and then QSSSR, and I can't think of the name all of a sudden. It's often used by silence in a lot of their information, and eliminating that I don't know, eliminating that fear of responding to others. So giving them an out and a way to adjust themselves so that they're not afraid to talk in your classroom. If the support is needed for tracking the conversation, so if they're having trouble tracking conversations, evaluate how much teacher talk versus student talk is going on in your classroom. Maybe you need to give them more opportunities to talk among themselves. Make sure that you build background before the discussion, either through video or hands-on or pictures or something. Use visuals to enhance the conversation, kind of like what we did with the videos. And then you can use the listen and draw or listen and write or reflection page along with your anticipation, like the anticipation guide. So they could be drawing a picture that goes along with it, or writing something down, taking notes as they're watching or viewing something. And this one is something we don't always pay much attention to. We just say they need to listen, but they need to be using effective listening skills. And so listen as the partner is speaking. We're giving them 100% attention. We're encouraging them to listen for words, encouraging them to paraphrase what the person said, and then summarize at the end. They have to be active listeners and involved in the lesson, because passive listening doesn't equal learning. So if they're just listening and we're not involving them and keeping them interested in it, that isn't equaling learning. Again, songs and chants are a great way to build that and connect it to prior knowledge and things that they already understand. And this next video I want to share with you is a good example of this. I love this video of these students. So I'm going to play this for you real quick.
To show you I can do all the things shapes do. So I will flip and I will turn and I will slide to the left and I will slide right and turn back to the front. Geometry is very easy, so I will flip, turn and slide. Oh, so I will flip, turn and slide. Oh, so I will flip, turn and slide. So I bet those students will remember probably for the rest of their life what a flip, a turn, and a slide is, because the teacher made it hands-on, made it interactive, taught it with a song. Things like that really stick with our students. So that's something I enjoy. Every time I watch it, it makes me smile. So
including that in our classroom all the time. Songs, we had a conference a couple of weeks ago in St. Louis. I think Tracy may have been with me then. No, maybe not. Anyway, our cab driver that day, or Uber driver that day, was actually a former ESL student, and we questioned him and asked what sorts of things in your career and education stuck with you the most and made the biggest impact on your learning. And his number one thing was song. He said, the teacher taught us all these little songs, and those songs stuck in my head and helped me learn, and they taught me English. He said, and I would sing them when I encountered what we sang about, and the song would go through my head. And he said, and I wasn't just learning those one vocabulary words that, like the door or whatever, I was learning all the little words that went along with it because they were part of the song. So song is very impactful for our students. Also, as I said before, we have to have a purpose for listening. They have to know what they're listening for. That's another reason for the anticipation guides are very good. What they're going to be needing to respond to, and how to respond and when to respond. So sentence frames come in hand there that you can use, or fill in the blank type activity. And I had this poster on my board, this RASA poster. So you receive the information, you're paying attention, you appreciate, you give small acknowledgments as you're listening, nodding your head, oh, that sounds great, things like that. And then you summarize the essence of the conversation. And then if you have any questions, you ask them at the end. So we always kind of kept that an ongoing process in our classroom. Again, that's planning ahead and ensuring that you're having a purposeful lesson in your classroom. So this is another activity that we used a lot, and it's called Dictogloss. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Dictogloss before, but this is another thing that involves active listening. So what you do is you play a short, or you read or play a short recording of someone telling a story. A lot of times I would use this with the students had like National Geographic magazine, or they had some of those other scholastic magazines that as a class in the regular classroom they would read each week, and the students weren't getting the gist of the articles. And so we started kind of doing these dictogloss with those articles. And there's one that you can actually listen to it online being read aloud. And so we would use that. But sometimes I would also just take the article and read it myself. And we even did this virtually sometimes. And I would make virtual lessons that the students could do in their classroom while the others were working on this in their classroom. They could listen to me reading it to them and do this activity within their classroom. Anyway, there's a Google app that I used here that's called Talk and Comment. And if you click the link, it will take you to this video recording of me reading this story about robots.
All about robotics. The word robot has been derived from a Czech word robota that means drudgery. A robot can be defined as a machine operated by computer programs that can perform small actions. They can be programmed to do various things. The field in which we study robots is known as robotics. Mostly, robots are used to do jobs that involve repetitive actions or dangerous jobs that cannot be done by humans. You must have watched sci-fi movies and are surely fascinated with those robotic characters. But real-life robots are way different from those extra smart machines.
So what you do with this is you listen to the reading, and then the student, after the person stops reading, they write down as much as they remember the first time through. And then the second time, you let them correct what they've written or add to what they've written as they listen to you read it again. And then the third time you listen to it again and they get with a partner and they compare their notes to recreate the text as closely as they can. And my students were always very competitive to see who had their paragraph as close as possible to the original. This link here at the bottom, writing and speaking and writing with speaking and listening, walks you through doing a dictogloss and gives several examples, and it's very detailed. So it's a really good resource. This one gives you the detailed instructions for doing a dictogloss on your own. But again, I found it very effective with my students, and they actually enjoyed it and became very competitive as who could get the most correct. And you would alter the language of your reading to fit the proficiency level of your students. Sometimes we pre-taught some of the vocabulary if necessary, so they would have some understanding of the words if they might lack that. Anyway, I'm going to put one more time the link to the slides someone asked. There we go. Okay, moving on. So using dictogloss, which kind of support do you think this one would be? Would that be sensory, graphic, or interactive? Well, it's your input this time.
I would say interactive.
Definitely would be interactive because you're listening and working with others. And depending how you set it up, you could have maybe some sort of graphic support if they're lower proficiency, where they're filling in certain information as they listen. And perhaps sensory because they're listening to a recording or listening, depending on how you set up your program. And why does it work? Because it keeps the students engaged and they're actively listening, and they have a purpose for listening. They want to pick up as much as they can. So these are some other listening supports that we used. There's one, the Super Simple Songs. If your students are inclined to learn better through music, that's a really good site. Books is also a listening, has some music and other things. Unite for Literacy has several books that are read aloud. And then there's some podcasts. This one explains QSSR. And then there's the link for Ed Puzzles so that you could sign up for that if you're interested. All right, speaking. Speaking is one of those skills that we ignore a lot in the classroom, especially at the upper grades. And our students need lots of practice with speaking, especially in the upper grades. It helps build their language. It helps enhance their skills. It's the foundation for 21st century careers, as was listening. You have to be able to listen, and then you have to be able to talk to people. And I love this this graphic here that says, I wrote or created something great, but only my teacher saw it. So if we're not having our students share things, then we may be the only audience that sees it. So we need to leverage the power of an authentic audience and give them those opportunities to speak in front of others. If they're afraid to speak, use games. We used games a lot in my classroom, and students will start speaking, not realizing that they're getting involved in speaking with other students. We also sometimes gave rewards and encouraged them to speak. So if we put a check mark on some of my students' desk, and if they spoke, they got a check, and then at the end of the week, they got a prize for how many times they spoke out in class. And then things like Flipgrid, where they can be independently practicing. I bought one of those green pop-up tents. I don't know if you've seen them. I bought it through Amazon. It cost, I think, like $30, but it's like a single person. They use them for changing rooms and things for the beach. But we put a little desk inside of it, and it was like a green screen. So it was surrounded green screen, and the students would go in there to do their Flipgrids or do a green screen presentation all by themselves. And we could hear them talking in there where they didn't realize anybody could hear them. And they spoke more freely, and they really would interact. So they felt better about that. Just that little bit of isolation took some of the fear of speaking away. And they were happy to record their Flipgrids and things. And sometimes, like I said, recording themselves in private allows them to feel more comfortable about speaking. Removes that effect, lowers that affective filter. Tracy also has one of those green tents. Those are really nice. Kids love them. Just big enough also. If they do not participate in discussion, the only thing you can do is just keep modeling, model some more. Give them those sentence stems that give them a little support. It helps relieve some of that stress. Make sure you use plenty of wait time. Let them know sometimes that you're not going on until they say something. Give them opportunities to talk with one another. So sometimes speaking with their classmates, speaking with their shoulder partner alleviates a little of that stress of that. They're mostly afraid that they're going to make a mistake and say something the wrong way and people are going to laugh at them. But removing that fear and making sure that it's okay. I try to speak in their language and make mistakes and let them laugh at me. Just making them feel comfortable. Dana, I will put a link in the presentation to the site where I bought the tent so you can look at it. So I'll add that to the presentation and you'll have it later. And again, provide opportunities for movement, talking, thinking, just working together. That collaborative effort gets your students speaking more and makes them more comfortable. And the more you do it in an ESL setting, the better they will be at doing it and moving it into the regular classroom. And then we use this a lot too. I had my students do formal speaking. So we would practice things again with Flipgrid and things like that. And then we would use this rubric of the PV, LEGS, PLEGS, and poise, voice, life, eye contact, gestures, and speed as our evaluation rubric. So the students know that I expected them to stand up. They weren't slouching or hiding themselves, and be proud of themselves. Use a voice that we could all hear, not whispering. Put life animation in, moving their hands and look like they're living, not just frozen in stone. Make eye contact with your audience, using gestures, and speak at a rate that we could understand, not so fast that they could get done with it. So those were all things that we used to evaluate speaking. And they had opportunities in the classroom to practice speaking in front of other people. Sometimes for some of my students, it was on a Flipgrid until they became comfortable enough to do it in front of the others, but they were still practicing those. And I would use this to evaluate their speaking even on Flipgrid. So there's that. And then these are all different kinds of speaking resources that I've used through the years. The if-when chart, the students love those as well. That was a big one. There are all kinds of speaking frames, and this toolkit for practitioners is really good. And then we used all of these different platforms. We used Screencastify a lot, and Seesaw was used in our district. EduCreations lets you make little videos, as does Explain Everything. Vocaroo is just, it gives you an unlimited amount of time to record speaking. A lot of the speaking tools that you use only like give you 5 minutes at the max, but Vocaroo lets you speak unlimited listening. And so that's really good. Voki allows you to implant the speaking in other platforms like Google. Flipgrid, we probably all know. QR stuff will let you put actually a QR code that will speak, and Go Animate will take a picture and make it talk, and the kids love doing that as well. So those are all some fun things that you can do with the classroom to get them speaking. And then reading. Reading is the big push in our state and actually in our nation right now. So it's recognized as probably one of the most important skills, both in first language and second language. And I've said this before in several presentations, that students have to know between 95 to 98% of the words in a comprehend them in a text to actually read the text. And 80% of the words in anything we read are those very simple words like and the and this and those. So those really don't count. And because even if you only read those, you're not going to get understanding. They have to have that academic language. So that's what we need to work towards, building up that academic language and giving them that support as we go along. And to build our academic language, they say you have to have at least 6 encounters for a word, but I would say that's probably for our English learners more like 20 or more encounters if they're going to have retention and be able to use that word. And not just hearing the word, but actually hearing it and then using it. So, next. So if your student struggles with letter sounds and phonics, do some activities where you're pairing pictures with the sounds, or practice through games. There are all kinds of phonic games that they can play. Do some sound sorts and sound segmentation sorts with familiar words. Have them write the sounds that they hear when you say a word out loud, using manipulatives like sound cards or magnetic letters that you can manipulate, and those manipulatives, and then clapping out and segmenting the sounds. That seems really simple and easy, but that really improved my students' reading when we would clap out the syllables, and then we learned the letter patterns for different syllables and how almost every syllable has to have a vowel, and talked about the ways that those are set up. That really improved students' writing and reading abilities when they learned those skills. So phonics are important. And also, if they're struggling with comprehension, that's when we have to, kind of what we've already said before, bring in those visuals, bring in those hands-on, have the students check their understanding with a rating scale. We give it a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, how well they understand, or a thumbs up, middle of the road, thumbs down as far as understanding. And don't just ask yes or no, do you understand? Delve a little deeper. Make sure you use high interest articles and passages, and incorporate that close reading activity so that they're having to understand as they're reading. You're making different checks throughout the reading for understanding. A great way to improve reading comprehension is focusing in on what you're reading. So if you're looking just at context clues, focus in on that while you're reading the lesson and talk about those as you're going. And then the next couple of pages talk about different content areas. If they're having troubles, this kind of gives you an idea of why that might be problematic for the students. Like in this math problem, Deb had a chocolate bar that had 10 equal pieces. She ate 4 of the pieces and gave her mom 3 pieces. Drag and drop fractions below to the images to show the total fraction of the bar. Well, the kids, ESL students who don't have the language they need yet are going to see this and say, she has 10 chocolate bars, I get that. She ate 4 chocolate bars. That's going to be it, because they don't understand those long adjectives and long noun phrases. So breaking it apart into smaller pieces, giving visuals that might help with the understanding, or things that might help with this situation. Same thing with science. If and then statements are really difficult for the English learners. So they have to recognize that it's unreal and it's dependent on the first statement. Also, this one has if you ever, it indicates that it might be something that they're going to do, something they could have done in the past. And the statement here that says is wasted overcoming is using past participles and continuous, the continuous state of the word. And so they have difficulty understanding that too. So they, if and then, they can't recognize that dependency. They have no understanding of the significance of an if you ever phrase, unless you read, have you ever, say, those books about if you would, which would rather be a shark or a whale or whatever those are. And those really helped with that, understanding that phrase with my students. And then is wasted overcoming, the student would either think that they were throwing away the scissors or there's no comprehension at all for them. So we have to look at the statements within sentences and kind of take into account that the student might not understand what that is stating. Same thing with social studies. When used in these, says that it's going to happen at some point, and it may happen, it may not happen. So they don't understand that kind of a sentence. And in this one, they also gave a definition in the middle of it. And they may not understand that that definition is helping them to understand the group of words before it. And then it says whether or not is an idiomatic expression, and they may not have that expression in their context of learning in their own language. So it would be incomprehensible for them. It's not something that they've learned or encountered before. And then same thing as in reading, we have to be really careful of the vocabulary. So looking at the irregular forms of words like struck and clung, like they were the irregular form of strike and cling. If they're not familiar with how some words change in their spelling, that might throw them off. Apostrophe S showing possession, they may not have that understanding that it belongs to someone, and they would ignore the word neck. So he clung to his mother and not even pay attention to the word neck. So things like that are things we have to take into consideration when we're looking at vocabulary. And then I had a teacher bring this exact sentence at the top to me one time and ask me why the students were having so much trouble understanding what was going on in their class. So I kind of color coded it for the teacher and broke it down into the parts. So it goes back to what we just said in the previous few slides. It gives you the part of speech. So the blue, they would have to know that it's unreal and won't happen. The black is talking about word tense. The red or adjectives, I think it was. The cyan color was a preposition. So all of these things breaking down the sentence showed how complex this sentence was and why the student had a little bit of trouble understanding what was going on in the text. So things like that, if we bring the attention to the complexity of the sentence and the proficiency level of the student, sometimes that helps bring that understanding of why we need to simplify and provide some supports for the students. And this teacher had a better understanding after I walked them through all of that. Here are some reading resources that we've used. Again, these are all, Laleo is new, that I used that just before I quit teaching in the classroom, but it breaks down language and gives you activities and kind of a game format of learning, like vowels and consonants and parts of speech and all of that. The rest of them are all reading activities. The reading bookmark is bilingual. And then this last one, My Padlet, has several other different reading sources that you can look at, as well as there's some listening, speaking, and writing on there as well. So just share that. And then that brings us to writing. There's a big correlation between written language and writing and language development. And I think this is really important to share with classroom teachers and anyone working with English learners. They usually develop their listening first, and then speaking, and then reading, and finally writing, because the writing comes last because they have to incorporate everything else and, excuse me, really understand the language to be able to put it together and put it together in order and have it make sense. So that's what this paragraph is talking about. If your student struggles with forming sentences, use pictures first. Let them make like a picture graph of what they're trying to say. Use graphic organizers, color code, kind of like I did with the other one. Make silly sentences and have them copy them. And provide them with topics of their interest to write about. Let them draw first or talk through the sentence before they write it. You can also use that text or speech to text on the computer, and have them say it out loud and then write it, or again, speech to text. If they struggle with expanding, use that write around strategy where you write something, you pass it to the next person, they add on, and that builds that. Do practice activities focusing on one part of the sentence at a time, where you add a stronger verb, or you add a stronger adjective, or just add an adjective and then add some other details. Again, graphic organizers. Provide examples of simple and strong sentences. Sometimes we started with a simple sentence and just built onto it as we went along. And then always using mentor text, those posters that you can put around your room. And then this is something called the picture word inductive model. Again, this was something we did quite often in my classroom, and the students loved it. So you start with, we started with a book or with a picture. And so here's this first picture, and the students would start naming things that they could identify. And they just kept adding more and more names of things that they knew in the picture. And we left it up on the wall probably all week, as often as we could, as long as we were doing this lesson. And they would come in and say, oh, I thought of something else to add to our picture. And we'd add it each day until we got as many as we wanted. And then I would provide them with a sentence frame or to fill in. And we would use the words and then fill in what we had. So we have one day, a farmer was working in his field. He looked up and saw a train. The train had 3 cars. He dropped his pitchfork when he saw something fall off the train. And a lot of my students worked on farms, so they knew like pitchfork, and they knew some of these other words, and many of them had seen a train, so it was very applicable for them. And again, this is a visual, this is interactive, and it gives you a picture that you can use. And a lot of times we were talking as well. I'm trying to go quickly because we're getting low on time. This comes from California. It's a matrix for helping determine what your proficiency level of your students is in writing. I put the link here. It's actually very well developed, and they use this to identify new students and what their level is in California. This one is talking about sorting and categorizing. There were times like I would bring in a bag of different things. I brought in plastic animals one time. I brought in cars one time. I brought seashells, and we would separate them out. I'd have them tell me, put them into groups by different things about them. So we would sort them, and then they would have to give me a category heading for the different ways we sorted. That's kind of what this is on this page. You can cut these apart and sort them and put them in the different categories, or you could just fill in a chart with the different categories. And then these are 2 videos that go more in depth on how you can use sorting and categorizing to build the language of English learners.
List group label is both.
Welcome to
Play that. And then these are different writing sources. This one I love. Every year my students, we would write something, and we created this ABC book about Halloween. That is, my students were amazing. This book, this platform called Story Jumper lets you create these. It has all the graphics. It's very simple to use. You can buy this book in hardback form afterwards if you're interested. We created this book, and then we bought it and gave it to our library to put in the library. It only costs $5.39. But the great thing is it reads
our Halloween ABCs.
I signed a letter of the alphabet to each student, and they did a search in the dictionary.
Aliens from faraway galaxies are walking the streets.
And each one had their own page, and they did all of the graphics and everything, and then recorded themselves. And I did a couple of pages as examples. I wanted to share this page because this student who did the Green Lantern was brand new, couldn't speak any English at the beginning of the year. And this was like in October. So August, September, 3 months. And this was his.
Frankenstein fears werewolves' fangs during the full moon. Green Lantern glows green for Halloween. Frankenstein.
He was so proud of himself, and he loved Green Lantern for some reason, but that was what he picked, and he could read it, and he became part of the book as well. But it gives you the whole book, and there's graphics, and then, and as I said, you can share it with other people. You can give them a link that they can go and look at it online, or you can print it out, or you can buy it and share it that way. Anyway, I wanted to share that with you. It's really cool. This photo writing prompts, there are probably 2,000 pictures I gathered through the years. So you can go on that, and we would pick out a picture and then use that for the picture word inductive model, or we would just write about the picture. So that's there. This one, let's write about cows, is another writing activity that I did. Where it's like, I have to explain, let me look it up here. And we use this have, can, are method of writing sometimes. So we would look at something, what do cows have? And we'd list everything. What things can cows do? We'd list all of those. And then cows, what are cows? And then they put things, and then we would create sentences and paragraphs in that way. And we use this about all kinds of things that we talked about. And we used it with firemen and all the topics that we wrote on. So that's a good tool to use. Modeling and practice, we usually use I can, we do, you all do, and then you do. So we added a step, and we repeated that often, and then we applied it. So with I do, these are some things as a teacher when you're starting out, the ways you can do. We do, the teacher's role becomes the listener and questioner, and the students are doing this. When we do the we all do, it's more like pairs or small groups, and then you're helping to clarify, and then the independent action with you do. And then I've given you several charts for listening. These are I do, we do, you do activities that go with each one. And these activities there, you can find them in that go-to strategies that were developed in Kansas City. So that takes you to that link that explains those activities. All right, the last thing to consider, the most important thing to consider is your students. So we can't downplay how well we need to make them feel safe and valued in our classroom. And if they feel safe and valued, they will have no problem doing anything else for us. One of the very most important things that you can do is call your students by name, find out as much as you can about each one, and touch base with them every day if possible. In our district, I instigated the My Name, My Identity campaign. I had each one of my students make a video of themselves saying their name, and we put that video in their digital portfolio so that it was there for their classroom teacher to listen to them saying their name. If they were able, I had them tell me why their name was important or what it meant or who gave it to them. So it made them personal, because your name is part of your identity, and we should use their names and not try to Americanize them. And then this is a nice article on getting the students' names right and why it matters. And it is very important. It helps make them feel part of the classroom. And then I always share this with classroom teachers and administrators, that there is no one single EL profile. I get often asked, how can we make this fit for our English learners? And my answer is, I don't know your English learners. I don't know each one of them individually, because each one has their unique needs and capabilities and strengths. And you can't blanket statement and make tell something that's going to work for all of them. You have to look at each one individually. And these are just some of the terms we use to describe them. And then it talks more in depth in this link at the bottom about the different types of English learners that are present in our country. In Missouri right now, we have probably a little more than 33,000 now. We probably are back up closer to 35 as of our last assessment. And most of them are American born, 82% now. So we're having fewer and fewer that are foreign born, and this is their first time in the United States. Our top language is Spanish, English, Somali, Bosnian, and Vietnamese. Some of them, we have a lot more that only have like 3 or 4, but we still count them. We have over 200 languages in Missouri. And proficiency levels, the majority of our students are at a level 3 proficiency. And that doesn't mean we stop working with them after they get to level 3. We still have a lot of them at level 4, and they're not going to get out of this level 4 and get to that 4.7 unless we keep giving them support until they get to 4.7. So that's one of my little soapboxes. We can't stop working with them just because they've reached level 3. We have to keep adding those things that they may have missed while they were learning English. So always, again, get to know your students. These are just some other ways that you can make the culture of your classroom and your school more inviting. And one of these other things that you can do is celebrate every success and use academic language with your feedback. So like, I'm proud of you for sticking with that math problem until you figured it out. I like the way that you used the formula that I gave you and plugged in the correct answers. So be specific in the way that you give your feedback to students. That helps them understand what they've done right and what they need to work on. And then this last bit is about remote learning. If you have to go back for some reason, it gives you some ideas of things to work on. A lot of it is repeated from the other part, and talks about using the FAIR model and Cognates. And then there's some different websites and activities listed here. Activating prior knowledge. This gives you some websites that you can go to. There's an article or a publication on the DESE website about teaching in a virtual environment. Then using your visual cues, you can use the Noun Project. This gives you links to some photos that are free images to use. I don't know if you're familiar with Rewordify and ListenWise, but they help to simplify your text. And then provide different ways of output, like Flipgrid. There's that Pevlegs again, and these all have links to the different things that you can use in the classroom. And then those are the references. Whew. So we made it. So that is the end of today's presentation. And I will put in later the link to that green pop-up tent. And anything else that you have questions, this is the time to ask. I'm going to put this link in the chat. I'm going to open it up to your questions again. and stop sharing. Talk fast at the end, but thank you for paying attention and for being here with me. And again, if you have any questions, unmute. Or comments. Today is Amazon Day, so if you want that green tent, this is a great time to buy one. All right, if you haven't already, please make sure you put your name and district in the chat. And if you have questions that you want to ask later on, here is my email. You're welcome to email me at any time. I try to answer the day you email or soon after.
Can I ask a technical question?
Most definitely.
Okay. So when we're entering our students again this year in our student information system, when they become a monitor student, we receive title funding. So in there, I just want to make sure that I mark them as not eligible. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
When they're monitor, they move to not eligible.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
No problem. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.